Go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first day of the Facebook Challenge, the Ultimate Parent Challenge. Today, you are going to be learning to how to persuade your child like an FBI crisis negotiator, an expert psychologist. My name is Minson Vo. I am the chief consultant and founder of Courtier Consultations, and today I am joined with the rest of my team. Please introduce yourselves.
I'll go first. I'm Alex, and I am the president of Courtier Consultations.
Hi, my name is Nathan. It's nice to meet you, Kim and Diane. I am the research director of Courtier Consultations.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ryan, and I'm the creative officer of Courtier Consultations.
All right. So, Kyle, Nathan, and Alex have been working with me and together for a very, very long time now. And we have been making a ton of progress. So today I'm excited to have them show you the PowerPoint and share parts of it with you. Right, let's start.
All right, so probably wondering, are they really that similar? I mean, we're comparing crisis negotiations to one with a child. So at its roots, let's take a look at the characteristics of each. With crisis negotiations, we'll be dealing with people. And when it comes to negotiating with a child, you'll also be dealing with a person, hopefully. So I can hope you can already see the resemblance going on here. Just a side though, in both fields, negative emotions are going to run high. In regards to crisis negotiations, individuals from any facet are going to feel tense, distressed, and nervousness, especially when lives are on the line. As for with a child, lives could very well still be on the line, but usually your child is clouded with a temper of emotions. And both of these are what lead to the very next similarity, being that there's a lot of irrationality. A lot of irrationality is going to be present. When emotions are high, rational thinking is low, and this isn't just regarding the child or crisis causers per se. In the heat of the moment, crisis negotiators and parents alike are very well being pushed to the limits, equally creating irrational thinking from both parties, which is counterproductive and could lead to the worsening of these relationships. Now, when you're dealing with a child or even children, you might not be fortunate to have a spouse or another person on hand to help you out, unlike in crisis negotiations, where teams are prepared to be on deck in assisting one another. Regardless, both situations will have set consequences that are bound to happen if negotiations were to fail. For a crisis, these consequences could be intervention, injuries, or even death. And with a child, this could be screaming, rejection, or resentment. So, taking a holistic look at it, yes, FBI crisis negotiation and negotiation with a child are fairly similar.
So, as Alex covered, FBI crisis negotiation and negotiations with your child, they're similar in many ways. There are differences, but they are similar. So, I'm going to speak on behalf of all negotiations when I say that there is a role of emotions. Emotions play a huge role in how you negotiate, and I'm going to explain in just a little bit. The first point being, all human decisions are driven by emotions. Now, where does this come from? It comes from millions of years of evolution, and it comes from our days of instinct and trusting our gut to keep us alive, right? Emotions play a huge part in how we react to things and how we problem solve later on. And a high emotional state literally prevents logical reasoning, right? Since you have an emotional reaction before you have a logical one, that means that the more important something is to you, the bigger your emotional reaction to it and the more likely you're going to have your logical reasoning inhibited, right? And that is literally the reason why you don't make decisions when you're angry. People tell you not to do that because it could come back to bite you in the butt, right? And what that says is emotions have an inverse relationship with rationality. And you can see this in a sort of emotional, rational seesaw. As emotions go up, rational thinking goes down, or logical thinking goes down. As logical thinking is up and is high, usually emotions are low. And you can definitely see that right here. It works in that way.
Now, there are common mistakes that happens with parents when dealing with this topic. So when you try to reason with your child why your view makes logical sense, um, even though your point of view might make logical sense and appear to be the correct and only point of view, be also open to listen to your child's perspective as well. There are different perspectives on many subjects, and be open minded to that. And showing active listening and demonstrating that you understood makes them feel valid and important. So that's a very important thing to do. And also, listening to your child shows empathy towards them. And remember, what might be logical to you might not be logical to them. And um, using the reward and punishment training method. Um, I mean, this method says by rewarding your child when they behave well, you're going to be encouraging that behavior. But here's the problem: they are, from then on, going to behave well just to be rewarded, not because they want to behave well. Therefore, they will not learn anything really. Also, every time they behave well, they will understand that they are always going to be rewarded. And once they don't get rewarded, they will lose trust in you. They will hesitate and do that again. So, on the other hand, this method also says that punishing your child when they do something undesirable, well, they will not want to do that again to avoid that punishment. However, that's just temporary. This is the reason some parents use punishment over and over again because they're not very effective. Punishment work as a short-term gain. It's momentary and it causes long-term resentment from both sides. Now, when you try to be nice to persuade your child, as we all know, children, they're like a sponge and they absorb everything they're exposed to. Their personality, their view of the world and behavior, it's all affected by their nuclear family, by their parents. So the person that raises and takes care of them is a person who trusts and they look up to. So if you try to be nice to persuade them, they're going to learn that behavior from you and they're going to do the same thing with others. So you will be unintentionally encouraging that behavior. And remember, persuasion is not teaching, it's just forcing. Now, when you scream, when you present threats and punishments, this kind of behavior works pretty much the same way as the punishment training method. This will compromise your relationship, trust, and communication. These acts undermine your child's self-confidence as well by making them feel invalid and unable to please their parents. They also cause your child to be scared of you by making them want to avoid you, and that compromises communication and your relationship with them. Um, so when you think an agreement means action, that doesn't necessarily mean that. Just because they agreed to something you've said, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to do it. They often agree to your point of view or to a yes oriented question just to get rid of that question, just to avoid their interaction with you. And don't lose your temper because of that. Just try to communicate well with them, address the negatives, and by saying something like, it seems like you have something, you have a different perspective on this, right? And lastly, thinking that every conversation has a fixed by. So solutions to a problem at that moment are not limited to that problem. So try to add solutions and alternatives to that problem. Don't constrain the conversation by creating limited resources and means. Implement new techniques and outcomes by taking new paths to get to the same desired result.
All right. All right, so now we're going to go into the FBI's approach on this. On your right hand, you will see something called the Behavioral Change Stairway Model. This was developed by the FBI's Crisis Negotiation Unit in the year 1990, and it's been tested through thousands of real-life situations with terrorists, with bank robbers, with international kidnappers, and it has a 90% success rate domestically. So we know how powerful this is for dealing with human behavior. If you look at the model, you see that the first three steps are active listening, empathy, and rapport, and those deal with mainly emotion. And then you have influence and behavioral change, which deal mainly with problem solving. The mistake that a lot of people make is they prioritize or they make problem solving precede emotional intelligence. And this never works because of the way our minds are wired. The human brain, like Nathan said earlier, is wired to react emotionally first. They actually did an experiment where they removed the emotional limbic system from the brain, and the participants that had that part removed could not make any type of decision. They could always logically reason, but they could never make a decision. Emotions are the means for decisions, and that's why we need to deal with them first when using this model. The second thing is this model focuses on lowering emotional intensity. In order for problem solving to actually have an effect, the emotional intensity of the conversation has to be lowered to a minimum so that your child can be able to rationally think. In terms of the mechanism, this model is sequential, which means the steps must be in order. There's no skipping steps. There have been situations where crisis negotiators have skipped steps, and that's left the situation with one life or two lives or 10 lives lost. And it's cumulative, which means that each step builds on the last. Again, that links with it being sequential, but as you use each step, it should naturally lead to the next step. So it builds on top of each other. It's like a building, right? You use the foundation, or you build the foundation first, and then you build the stories on top of it. It uses rapport-based influence. There's a psychology study that says if people like you, they are 6 times more likely. It goes from, or almost 6 times more likely. It goes from 16 to 90%. They're more likely to be persuaded by you. And rapport makes them like you. Now, there are many definitions of rapport out there, but there's one that's very simple that I think Alex or Nathan later is going to cover. Rapport is two-way empathy, right? Empathy is you understand your child's perspective. You can feel or kind of feel what they feel. Rapport is when they feel it back. And the FBI uses that to influence people, because as soon as they trust you back, you have so much influence that you have to be careful, right? You have to do what's ethical. Last thing, this is a collaborative model. In our team's negotiation methodology, we don't even use the word negotiation. We use the word collaboration. It has to feel to your child like they are involved in the process. They have to feel like the solution at the end, they have to feel that they have as much stake in it as you do. Or in the best case scenario, they feel that it's their solution, not yours.
Now, beginning with the first stage of the behavioral change stairway model is active listening. This is the foundation to the entirety of the model. Active listening means being consciously engaged in what another person is saying so that you can interpret the layers of their message and gather hints to incentives that are motivating their actions. And this is important because it allows you to take in the other person's goals, their standards, and any other relevant information that they may leak out, which allows you to increase your chances at influencing your child. And with active listening, there are 8 skills, 5 of which we'll cover right now. The first is the label, which, to put simply, is a verbal observation of a dynamic or emotion. And labels can start off as it seems like, it sounds like, it feels like, or it looks like, which I'll give examples of. So to paint a picture, your child could be having some trouble with school and has been subtly showing it through their actions and the way they talk to you, which you've recognized. So something you could say is, it seems like school's been frustrating for you, which would be a labeling an emotion, the emotion in this case being frustration. And if you wanted to label a dynamic, you could say something along the lines of, it feels like school didn't go well today. Here, you're making an assumption that something bad happened during school today, which is the dynamic of the situation. And don't be afraid to label incorrectly either. If you do, your child will just correct you, give you more context behind their emotions or what happened. And if you don't, then your child will just agree and possibly elaborate, giving you more information. And now when it comes to labeling emotions, if you manage to correctly label a negative emotion, it will diffuse the negative emotion. And if you label a positive emotion, it will reinforce it. And this is all tied to psychology, specifically dealing with the brain's amygdala and understanding mindfulness, which for time's sake, we cannot get into today. Now, I know this is just a lot for one tactic, but I promise the second one is much simpler. And the second one is the mirror. And as the definition says, the mirror is the repetition of the most important words someone has said. So as an example, say you're having a conversation with your child. They say, Mom or Dad, online school is tough. Here you can reply with a mirror by saying, tough? And you want to have an inquisitive tone. If you just reply back like, tough, it's just going to sound like you're mocking them at that point. So maintaining an inquisitive tone will give your child more chance to elaborate and reveal more information. And that's the mirror. The third skill is the open-ended question. Open-ended questions are questions that start with what or how and can be used to draw information or elicit some type of response without sounding overbearing or pushy. An example would be like asking your child, how will I know you'll do all of your chores? This specific question will get your child to admit to completing their chores, as well as sharing how you'll be in the know of it. And another example, this time a what question, could be like, what's stopping you from finishing the application? This specific question would reveal the obstacles behind their actions. And again, these are just examples of how an open-ended question can be utilized. Now, onto the fourth skill, are iMessages, which is a personal disclosure to develop rapport. Sometimes when you're talking with your child, they can be outright unreasonable, unproductive, or acting in a way that wouldn't be beneficial to anyone. So here you could use an iMessage. And the format of an iMessage usually goes like, when you blank, I feel blank because blank. So to give an example, when you yell and shout, I feel frustrated and annoyed because I don't know how to help you. So step one is when you, and then you would insert the counterproductive behavior when you yell and shout. Step two is I feel, and here you just state how you feel. I feel frustrated and annoyed. And the last step is because, and here you just explain why the behavior is a problem. So because I don't know how to help you. So to recap, when you yell and shout, I feel frustrated and annoyed because I don't know how to help you. So it's an easy skill that makes it easier to confront someone or your child about their behavior without seeming confrontational. And for the last one, it's really about focusing and fine-tuning your tone of voice. For general conversations or when you're using the label or mirror, it's okay to maintain a friendly tone of voice. And depending on the context, a slow, calm voice could be used when you're trying to convey that you're serious or want your words to really sink in to the other person's mind. And the slow, calm voice is applicable to any of these skills. Again, it's just a matter of context. Now, after utilizing these skills, when the other person conveys in some way that you've understood them and that you're right by saying that's right or yes, completely correct, perfect, that's when you can move on to the next stage, which is empathy.
All right. Actually, before we move on to the next stage, I want to interject a little, Alex, because I've heard in the past, when I throw out open-ended questions, it never works, right? When I say, how do I know that you're doing this? They're like, oh, I don't know, right? Or it's not my problem. Or how do I know you're focusing on school? And the child replies with, well, I don't know. If that's the response you get from your child, then that probably means you need to focus more on the label, the mirror, and the I statement in order to show that you're trying to connect with them first. Now, there are more passive open-ended questions like, what's the problem here? How are you feeling? But questions that actually get them to think up of a solution, like, how do we do this? How do we do that? You usually want to save for the end of the behavioral change stairway model, because by then they will feel like it's a collaboration. At the beginning, only you will feel like it's a collaboration. And one more thing in regards to the I statement, Alex's format is absolutely correct, though we can use it in other ways as well. It doesn't have to be an exact format. It can be like, well, I can relate to this, or I can imagine how you feel. Now, be very careful with what you say that starts with I, because when we were talking with the former commander of the NYPD hostage negotiation team, he was telling us about a situation where he told a guy who was jumping off, or who was about to jump off a bridge, he told him, I know exactly how you feel. And that completely diminished the rapport and the connection in that conversation, because the guy replied with, if you knew how I felt, then you would be standing right here next to me. So after that, the chief said that he changed that statement to, I can only imagine how you feel. And that has worked for him since. All right, enough interrupting. I'm passing on to Nathan.
Okay. Well, before we begin stage 2, does anyone in our expanded audience have any questions?
Oh, we're doing questions in chat.
Okay. Well, if you do have any questions, yes, put it in chat. I know some of you guys got here late. So, Alex has covered stage 1, which is active listening, right? Which is intentionally exerting energy in order to listen to what they say. Think of stage 2 as an extension of stage 1. First and foremost, your child will only try to understand you once you've already done the same, meaning that you cannot tell your side of the story before they tell theirs. They will reciprocate once you have done the same for them. And that also means that empathy does not mean agreeing with your child, okay? That's a misconception that a lot of people have. When you're being empathetic towards your child, that means you're adopting their understanding and their thinking and how they feel. That is not at all what it means. Empathy, it is defined as understanding what the other side is feeling. That's simply it. You can keep what you're thinking, your own perspectives, and their perspectives separate. You can understand them and keep what you're thinking as well. You don't have to agree with it at all. And that is why empathy is not instantaneous. It is a natural result of the cumulative application of active listening. Stage one has to be done multiple times and demonstrated a lot for empathy to be shown and for you to look empathetic to your child. And you're asking, well, how do you demonstrate empathy? How do you show that you're empathetic? Well, that's easy. You demonstrate empathy with a summary. And what a summary essentially is restating the content and the emotions of your child's perspective all in one, right? Think of it as a test. If active listening is what will get you through the test, then the test itself is the summary. You have to active listen enough so that you can summarize everything your child is saying and they can feel like they've actually been listened to. And lastly, empathy is more of a transition phase. It connects stage one and stage three together.
Now, the last stage is rapport. So, rapport gets your child to feel more empathetic towards you, making you more persuasive. One of the most effective ways to build rapport is by listening to your child. So, in order for them to listen to you, you first need to listen to them. You have to actually to active listen to them and show understanding of their point of view by summarizing what they said. Otherwise, they're just going to show resistance until you see things the way they do. And it's crucial that you have that your it's crucial that you voice out their point of view back at them, showing that you care about what they said, and that's gonna make them feel like their point of view is valid and considered. And once you do that, they will be more willing to accept your point of view. And remember, you don't necessarily need to agree with their point of view, just understand and show this understanding. Now, there are three main components to establish rapport. The first one is face-saving justification with positive reinforcement. So these are things you say to make the other side feel safe, such as, look, I know I have all the rights, you have all the right to be mad at me. I made a mistake. So the other side will be saving face with this. You're gonna be taking this guilt and addressing the problem because that's the first and only thing they have in mind. You're guilty. It's your fault, you know. Now, minimization of negative reactions works pretty much the same way as the first one. But this one, you would say something like, anyone would be a bit upset at this, you know. And if you notice, they're very angry, very upset at you. Of course, you don't want to say anybody would be a bit upset about this, you know, because they're very angry. So just say anyone would be upset at this, just. And that applies if there's a negative response to the conversation. Now, you find the third one is finding common ground and turning disagreements into joint problems. So you are able to establish rapport by also finding common ground. So find something you both have in common, you both agree on. So include yourself as part of their problem. So you can show that by replacing the word I and you with the words our, we, and us. So they can feel collaborating. You try to collaborate with them. So they don't see you as the enemy, but as their teammate. And that's just going to make them support you as well. And when the report stage is complete is when you feel like your child is willing to collaborate with you.
All right. Now, the influence stage is the mark on where problem solving skills can finally take effect. You've lowered their emotional intensity, and now they have enough rational processing for solutions to be thrown at them. Oops. Oops. There you go. All right. So, in the stage of influence, you want to use something called collaborative pronouns. Now, Kyle touched on this earlier. Collaborative pronouns, it's just we, us, our. It makes them feel included within the conversation, and it makes them feel like it's a collaboration. So, in the influence stage, when you're trying to solve the problem, you never want to dismiss their problem as theirs. In return, they will not dismiss your problem as yours. Now, I know what a lot of people think. They're like, oh, well, my child doesn't care about my problems, right? They always think that my problems are my problems. If you go through the previous three stages correctly and you build rapport is them understanding you back. So if they understand you back, then you can move to influence. Then you can frame common problems. Now, let me give you an example. A good statement that we always use in negotiations, not just with kids, but with anybody, is so we're faced with a big problem here. Notice how I said we, and I said we're faced with a big problem. Like we're both standing on the same side. We're faced with one enemy. And after that, then we can propose a solution by using an open-ended question like Alex said earlier. So how do we solve this problem? Right? Again, notice how I used a collaborative pronoun, and I never dismiss that problem as the child's. So when you propose something, there's a structure to it. This is a very basic structure. It's nothing too complex. This is adapted to when you want to persuade your child. Now, the first thing you want to do is you want to propose the solution in the form of an open-ended question. You don't want to ask, well, can you focus on your education right now then? Because what that will do is they'll probably lean towards a yes, but more than likely that yes is not going to be any form of commitment. And you won't find the obstacles that underlie their response. If you ask something along the lines of, well, what do you think about focusing on your education for a while? They will give you the full picture. They will tell you about the obstacles involved. And then once you get the obstacles, you can clear them. Next thing, the reason and benefit. This is inserted. You can do it at the beginning of the open-ended question or after the open-ended question. Here's an example. How do you feel about focusing on your education right now because the school year is ending very soon? They did a study, I forgot what university it was. I am pretty sure it's Harvard though, where they removed in the past when people had to line up in public to make copies, nobody had a personal printer. They removed all the copy machines from that university except one. And they had people lined up at the copy machine. Now, there were three types of researchers, but we're only going to cover two. The first type of researcher, they came up and they asked the people in line for the copy machine, can I skip you, or something along the lines of that? Can I skip you to make copies? Without any reason, without any justification. And I forgot the exact percentage rate, but it was very, very low. It was less than 40%. Now, the second group of researchers, they came up and they were like, can I skip you because I have to make copies? They didn't give any real reason on why they needed to make copies, but they just added a reason. And that increased the success rate to 90%. So now we know that the benefit or the reason that you give is extremely important in whatever proposal you decide to give to your child. And here's an example. Because this will let you play sports without compromising your grades, you see that the reason comes before. How do you feel about joining the football team at school? And we'll only let you play if you're passing your classes, right? You get the reason first, and then you get the open-ended question to find the obstacles to solve.
All right, and last but not least is stage 5, the behavioral change. I've always butchered explaining this, so Minson, please take the stage.
Go ahead. I'll interject when I can. Oh, Alex.
I think he got disconnected.
Interesting. All right. Well, he should be back soon. Kyle, Nathan, message him real quick or something. All right. I guess I'll try to get Nathan and Kyle to talk more on this too, because I already talked a lot. So Nathan, let's tell them a little bit about implementation of fake commitments and what usually happens in parent-child conversations.
Okay. Well, if you guys remember, if everyone remembers, Minson touched upon the sort of fake commitment yes. It's when your child says yes, but they actually mean more like a no. They're saying yes at the moment to get out of the conversation or out of a solution, right? Or out of you asking them something, but they don't really mean to do it and they have feelings against it. Everyone has faced hesitation at some point. And this stage is supposed to deal with those fake commitment yeses. It weeds out all of those fake commitment yeses in order to make the solutions happen. And the behavioral change stage is more so like an implementation stage in that matter. It helps get the proposal actually moving on the road. A specific solution is agreed on by you and your child, and implementation is important because it makes sure it happens. You have to ask yourself and your child these questions. How's the action going to get carried out? How's the action going to stay consistent? How can the risk of acting be reduced? What are some backup plans in case the action doesn't stay consistent? This is important because your child is the only person that can decide to do the decision or not. You cannot make them do the decision. So you have to put them in a position where they feel completely they feel like they should do it, right? There's nothing against them. Okay. So you summarize the solution agreed on and the implementation process, and usually you get 3 yeses. You ask them 3 questions and you get 3 yeses in order to solidify and reinforce the positivity of the implementation process. You were saying something, Minson?
Yeah. So Nathan's citing from a source called the Black Swan Group, and they came up with this theory that if you get 3 yeses in a conversation, then it'll secure the implementation process. Now, that actually dates back to a study, I believe, done in 2007 on the role of the number 3. They had participants rate which one of the three arguments, or they had three arguments laid out, and they had participants rank which one of the three arguments were the most persuasive. The first argument had less than 3 reasons. The second argument had 3 reasons. And the third argument had more than 3 reasons. Now, theoretically, the argument with the most reasons should be the most persuasive, right? That's actually not true. They found out that the argument with the 3 reasons is the most persuasive. So that's why Nathan mentioned the 3X rule. Now, you see, I wrote those questions out just as a baseline, but when you ask them, you should really be asking, how is our action going to be carried out? How is our action going to stay consistent? And you might want to mention before that, hey, so I'm going to be responsible for my part of this. Would you, or I need you to be responsible as well, right? You need to engage that reciprocity, and you need to maintain that collaborative, I guess you can say, aura through the very, very end. Because if at the end they feel like it turned from a collaboration to a conversation where you're just trying to persuade them, then the deal is going to fall apart because there's this lack of trust.
All right. So we actually covered a whole bunch of things today. And I know everyone is not going to remember them all. So here's to summarize some of the most important bits and maybe remind you of the things attached to it. So first and foremost, in many ways, an FBI crisis negotiation is like a negotiation with your child, right? You would never call it a negotiation with your child, but it is. And since negotiation is negotiation, it has emotions applied to it. Emotions play a big part in all negotiations. When emotions are high, rational thinking is difficult, vice versa. When emotions are low, rational thinking is better. And based off of this study, based off of these scientific facts, the FBI Crisis Negotiation Unit developed the behavioral change stairway model as a framework that is focused on collaboration, not competition. It's not a debate. It's not even a fight. It's all collaboration. It's all about we, and we. Emotional intensity should be lowered before problem solving is engaged. The behavioral change stairway model does it. You should too, because everyone has an emotional reaction before they have a problem solving reaction or a logical reaction. Sorry. You should be empathetic toward your child, and they will return the favor. They want to reciprocate that kind of behavior after you have done the same for them. You collaborate to work through different proposals and to find an acceptable agreement. This goes back to collaboration pronouns. We, our, us, right? And you ask specific open-ended questions to see how this proposal would work. Is this going to work for you? Are you free Mondays and Wednesdays to play with your friends? Or does that interfere with your homework, right?
All right. Why don't, before we move on, let's give them a quick, since we have time left, let's give some sort of example of the behavioral change stairway model. Now, we're not going to go through the whole thing because, I mean, crisis negotiations, they take hours, and probably negotiations with your child, you're going to have to split it up in separate sections. So we're just going to cover some parts of it. All right, so Kyle, let's do it for them. We're going to demonstrate the active listening phase, right? With the labels, mirrors, I messages, and what else I say? Open-ended questions, right? So I'm going to be the irrational child. Kyle is going to try to diffuse my emotions in a slow, calm tone of voice that's going to calm me down. All right. The situation is, let's see, what's a good one? I don't want to focus on my education. You ready, Kyle?
Yeah.
All right. You're my father, by the way. Dad, I don't want to go to school anymore. It's stupid.
Stupid.
Yeah, it's stupid. You think I like all of this? You think I like going to school every day and working my butt off and like getting these? I just don't like it.
It sounds like you're very stressed about school.
I am. Yeah, I'm really stressed about it.
And what makes you feel that way?
Because my teachers are dumb. They don't listen to me. They don't actually teach their. I mean, okay. I have to be honest. I don't hate learning, right? I like learning things, but when my teachers don't freaking teach, then what's the point of me going to school?
Right. So you want to learn, you like learning, and you like that your point of view is being considered.
Yes. All right. So Kyle just tried to do the active listening phase. Now, of course, it's a cumulative process, so that would have to go on for estimate from our experience, probably 5 to 10 minutes before it actually develops empathy, right? And you see Kyle, he was using the mirror, he was using the label, and he even repeated back what I said. It's very, very, very simple, but at the same time, it can be very difficult because what you just got from me was a mild example, right? And very tense situations where the child is very anxious, the emotional part of their brain is on a high arousal level, then you will see that it's a lot more difficult to deal with it in a short time frame. So you really have to slow things down, take breaks, or if you cannot take a break, you really have to persist and keep trying to understand their perspective. That is the key. Because if you don't do that, again, you're never going to be able to propose a solution. In the FBI, they call the act of going to the influence stage of the model getting the right from your child to propose a solution. Parents never start off a conversation where the child is emotionally reactive with the right to persuade their child. So they have to earn that right through the process of developing empathy and building rapport.
And let me just add something to that. That's also very important that you add silence to the conversation. Uh, I mean, if when your child is angry, they're gonna be yelling at you, and you know they're going to think that they're right, their point of view is right, and you're wrong. So uh, by active listening and actually using silence is a perfect way to is a great way to handle that, just because silence gives room for them to speak. That means go on, I'm listening to you. And of course you got to active listen, you got to pay attention to them, and you know understand their point of view, so they can you can show this understanding. And that way, uh, like we talked before, that way you're going to be more manipulative, um, just because they're going to be more open mind, because they're going to feel like you listen to them.
Exactly. Oh, and we forgot this one, Nathan.
Yeah. Well, finally, an agreement does not become action without implementation. Remember that. Implementation is just as important as all the other stages.
You know, an example we like to use is, let's say you plan a trip with your friends, right? You're like, hey, let's go to, where's a place that people like to go to? Let's go to Fiji next month, right? Your friend's like, great, right? And they end the phone call, and then you're like, well, what's going to happen? So you buy the ticket and you tell them to buy the ticket. They buy the ticket on the same date as you, but you guys don't discuss anything else. Day comes, you show up at the airport 3 hours early, and you don't see them. You're like, oh, where are they? And then they show up with like a bunch of friends and stuff, and you're like, wait, I thought we were just going by ourselves, right? They're like, oh no. And then you guys start heading to different flights. That's why we need implementation. Without implementation, the action either doesn't happen or falls completely apart. We know there's a lot of situations where the child's like, okay, I'll do it, and then it never stays consistent. That's why implementation is needed. A good technique you can do is have this, they call it a habit tracker. In James Clear's famous book entitled Atomic Habits, he talks about how if you have a calendar and you mark an X off every day when you complete a habit successfully, you'll be a lot more likely to stay consistent with that habit because the feeling of satisfaction. Now, we've seen it in shows, we've seen it in movies, and a lot of us have done it in the past, but it cannot be dismissed. It is so important, more important than a lot of us and most people think. It's habit tracking and being able to get your child to implement the process with you or the agreement with you successfully.
Yes, that was pretty good actually, Minton. Okay. Well, I do want to say that Elizabeth had a question about what face saving is, what face saving justifications were, and what minimizations were. Could you elaborate?
Yeah, sure. Face saving justifications. So it will feel like you're pressuring your child if they have to feel like they're getting off their side of the podium or side of the stage to be persuaded by your point of view. Face saving is people want to be, they don't want to be embarrassed. People do not want to be embarrassed. They want to save face. That's the term we use for it in negotiation. It's just basically people don't want to be embarrassed in front of third parties, in front of their friends, in front of their family, or they don't want to be embarrassed in front of themselves. When you are persuaded by somebody, we know this, when you feel like you have been persuaded by somebody, you feel like you are conceding your point of view. Because the negotiation is supposed to be a collaboration, you never want your child to feel this. So when in the process of developing rapport, you need them to save themselves from that embarrassment. So you justify their actions by saying, you have the complete right to feel this way. You know, your actions are not unjustified, right? You have the complete right to feel this way about school. You know, if school is that tough, then you should be feeling that way. That's a face-saving justification. It's like, hey, you're not conceding from your point of view because that is valid, right? I believe that that is valid. The second thing is the minimization. You're just minimizing their negative behavior. Now, Kyle mentioned it. You're just decreasing the intensity by labeling it as something less intense. Now, this can backfire on a lot of people because they begin the conversation with this. At the beginning of the conversation, you want to label the behavior that's present. You don't want to try to minimize it. You don't want to make it worse. You want to say that if they describe themselves as being pissed off, then you would say, well, you seem pissed off, right? Or I know you're pissed off if it's very, very apparent. once you've done that, then you can minimize your negative behavior. Because if at the beginning you're like, well, you seem a bit upset, they're going to blow up in your face in less than a second. So minimization, save for the rapport stage after you've successfully and completely dealt with the real negative dynamics at the beginning of the model. Now, Kyle, why don't you explain this one?
Well, this slide, so everybody that came today to this event, we're offering additional 15% off of all our packages.
Including, wait, hold up. I'm sorry to interrupt again. Including the ones who are watching the recording.
Yeah, so the expiration date's within 5 days from today. So that's in March the 20th. And the discount code is down below in the, yeah, it is down below. So, I mean, don't lose this offer. We're already offering 15% off, but that's additional. So, yeah.
So basically for every one of these packages, we have a monthly installment and we have a one-time payment. The one-time payment is always going to be 15% off of the monthly installment because it's a one-time fee. What this is offering you is 15% off that one-time payment. So if the one-time payment is already 50% off, you get 50% off of that. That's the code. It will not be in the, well, it'll be in the recording. So, all right. And that is it for the presentation. Does anybody have any questions before we end? Any questions about anything? All right. Well, thank you so much for coming. And if you're watching, thank you so much for watching. The PDF notes will be included within the group and the files section. And if you're live right now, I'll just send it in the chat. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. This was a pleasure.